open the pod bay doors.
Greetings and welcome to another exciting episode of the Cinematic Traveler Podcast. I am your intrepid movie-exploring host, Chris, and on this episode, it's time once again to review a film recommended by our movie quote contest winner for January, who has picked a classic film that I have never seen but have always wanted to, and that movie is The Night of the Hunter, directed by Charles Laughton. And I am really excited to talk about this. As I mentioned, I've heard a lot about it over the years, and this finally gave me an excuse to watch it, and I cannot wait to tell you my thoughts about it. But before I do, if you could do me a favor, whatever you're listening to the show, somewhere on that screen, there is a follow button. If you could go ahead and click that, it does help me and the show, but it also helps you. You will get all of my future reviews when they come out, as well as listen to previous episodes and hear my amazing reviews and my sexy, sexy voice. Also, if you could please share this show with all your friends and families and enemies, I don't care which, I would appreciate that as well. Share it on social media. You can also find me on social media. I am on Instagram at Cinematic Traveler Pod. I'm also on X or Twitter. That one is at CMT Pod. I'm on Blue Sky. That one is at Cinematic Traveler something, something, something. And if you don't want to mess with all that, I do have an email address, thecinematictravelerpod@gmail.com. So you have plenty of ways to follow me as well as get in touch with me and play along with the contest. And maybe next month, you could be telling me which movie to review. There, I got through that quick, fast, and in a hurry so we can get into this. I hope you're doing well, my beloved listener. I know we are closing in on that dreaded 14th day of February. If you do have someone special in your life, I hope you have a wonderful day and evening and end up in various strange positions that will leave your muscles sore the next day. If you are single like I am, hey, I'm here for you. You know what? You could just, like I said, subscribe to the show and have a marathon on Valentine's Day and listen to my voice. And then you could tell people on Monday, hey, you went out with this great guy Friday night, but all he did was talk about movies. See, I'm helping you out. That's what I'm here for. Either way, I hope you're doing great out there. Now let's get into this episode. I want to thank the winner of January's movie quote contest. That would be a young man who is quite a podcasting legend, as it were. His name is Frank, and he is part of not one but two podcasts. He does a solo podcast entitled Silver Screeners, as well as co-hosting another podcast with another legendary host, Davey A, and they do a podcast called Movies Across the Pod. And I am humbled that Frank, a podcasting icon, would even participate in the contest. But I knew he would recommend an old movie. However, I have heard somewhere a saying, it's not an old movie if you haven't seen it. I can't remember where I have heard that from. But at any rate, that would be the truth here. Because as I mentioned, I have heard of The Night of Hunter for many years now. Generally, if you ever see sort of the 100 best horror movies or best thrillers or something, it's usually on that list and someone will talk about it. I've heard Guillermo del Toro and William Friedkin. They've all spoken about this movie. I think even Spike Lee is a big fan of this film. At any rate, so I was always wanting to watch it, but I just never did for some reason. And this gave me an excuse. So again, I want to thank Frank for letting me do that and watch this, again, classic film. So before I get into my review, I do have to over-explain a couple of things. I am going to give you a spoiler-free review as well as a spoiler-free plot synopsis. Now, in that plot synopsis, I have hidden two movie quotes from movies that either share some DNA or maybe run parallel to this movie. And if you can identify those, you get a point for each one that you get right. At the end of the month, I add up all the points, and whoever wins gets to pick a movie for me to review next month. Or if this is your first time listening and you just want to play, let me know you're out there. I'd appreciate that as well. Or you can always get caught up and listen to previous episodes. I will count those points as well all the way up to the end of the month. So it's fun. I know it sounds a little uncool, but that's the best time of the week is to be uncool with Chris. Now with The Night of Hunter, directed by Charles Laughton and being released in 1955, we open this movie with Miss Cooper, played by Lillian Gish, who is for some reason, floating in space, telling a group of kids who are also floating in space tales from the good book involving being on guard against false prophets and wolves in sheep's clothing. Enter said big bad wolf, Harry Powell, played by Robert Mitchum, a quote-unquote reverend, riding along in his car after killing yet another widow as he tours this country. Now, as he is driving along, he is having a conversation with God, thanking him for the opportunity to do his work and allowing Harry to take the lives of these innocent people, or Harry might argue, and let's not forget the disease-spreading whore. Only in a world this shitty could you even try to say these were innocent people and keep a straight face. Hint, hint. Okay, you got to stay with me here just for a minute so we get the setup, all right? Harry ends up in this small town where the cops bust him for driving a stolen car and they send him to jail. Then we meet Ben Hoppa, who has just robbed a bank and killed the guard. Well, he comes rolling up into the front yard of his house where his son John, played by Billy Chapin, and his younger sister Pearl, played by Sally Jane Bruce, well, they're in the yard playing, and Ben comes rolling up, and he gets out. He's got a gun in one hand and a big wad of cash in the other. And he tells the kids, don't tell anybody where I'm hiding the money. And he proceeds to hide it in Pearl's doll for some reason. But at any rate, he says, hey, keep your mouth shut. Don't let anybody know about this money. Well, obviously, the cops show up. Ben gets arrested. He gets sent to jail, where who does he share a cell with? Well, of course, it's Reverend Harry Powell, who finds out about this money, but he doesn't know exactly where Ben hid it. Well, as we all know, the only thing a preacher loves more than God, that is money. So after Harry gets out of jail, he instantly heads to Ben's hometown, where he charms Ben's widow Willa, played by Shelley Winters, and the other town folk, convincing them that he is this amazing preacher, and finally, again, convincing Willa to marry him. But his plan is to marry her and get the kids to tell him where this money is. However, John is no fucking snitch, and he is not going to tell Harry anything. And when Willa mysteriously disappears, young John, he sees right through Harry Powell's bullshit, grabs his sister Pearl, heads for a boat on the river, and floats on down until eventually he ends up at Miss Cooper's house. John and Pearl feel safe with Mrs. Cooper and the other kids that she has taken into her home, but wouldn't you know it, Reverend Harry Powell, he does find them. He stands out in the yard saying something like, "You're all gonna die in there. All of you. You are gonna die." Hint, hint. That one's a tough one. Think about a sequel to a famous 80s horror movie that has a creepy preacher in it. That's all the hint you're going to get for that one. At any rate, unfortunately for John and Pearl, yes, Harry is there. But fortunately for John and Pearl, Miss Cooper is an American who does believe in the Second Amendment. So will this shotgun-toting granny be able to protect these kids from the Reverend Harry Powell? Or will God ordain him with the power to overcome all of these obstacles and find that money? Well, I will not spoil the movie and answer these questions, but I will give you the best review for The Night of the Hunter in all the podcast universe, nay, in all of the universe. So moving into my review, if this is your first time listening, or if you haven't listened in a while, I do break them down into 3 segments: the good, the bad, and the nitpicky. The good are the things that work for me in the movie. The bad, obviously, things that don't. And the nitpicky, these are things that are neither good nor bad, just sometimes Hollywoodisms or sometimes silly things in the movie that my weird brain picks up on that make me laugh. And as I am trying to do with this podcast, I'd like to make you laugh with them, because if there's something I love doing in this world, that is to make people laugh. And hopefully that's working. Y'all could let me know, leave a review or something for the podcast. Let me know that this is working. It's so lonely in my little fort of blankets out here. At any rate, let's move into the good of the movie. I've got to start with the cast, or at least the 3 actors that I really loved in this movie. The first one is the most obvious, Robert Mitchum as Reverend Harry Powell. Oh, he's just such a monster. He's a charming monster. I will give you that. You can see why these people would follow him. He knows what to say at the right time. He hides behind all of his quotes from the Bible and the hymns that he likes to sing. And the story of he's got on his hands, on his left hand, he has hate tattooed on his fingers. And on his right hand, he has love tattooed on his fingers. And he has this story that wows everybody about why I've got hate on one hand and love on the other hand. Let me tell you that story. Let me tell you how I got these scars. But at any rate, he is very charming when he needs to be, but he is also just this awful villain. God, he's so bad that even at the beginning of the movie, when he is talking with God, he can't remember how many people he has killed. That should tell you a lot about him. Again, this movie was made in 1955, so you're not going to get some graphic horror movie here. But what is implied is that he has been brutally murdering people for some time now. I would say that most of it is a hatred towards women, because that seems to be where most of his vile anger is unleashed. And there are probably many things that we could delve into with that whole side of this story, but I don't want to get too much into it. He's just a really great villain. He's the big bad wolf of this story. I mean, ultimately, this story is like a dark fairy tale, really, or a fucking kid's fever dream. But he represents that evilness, and he does it so well. As I mentioned, he can play that charming southernish preacher, and he's got that kind of deep voice, and he smiles, and he knows just exactly what to say. But boy, when he gets angry, like when he gets angry at Pearl because she won't tell him something, he just starts calling her all ugly names, and now he's got to cut her arm off and all that. There's a point where he's got the switchblade knife, and he's got it right at little John. He's got it right at his face, this little kid. But again, John, he's no fucking snitch. So you see that anger, and then there is this marriage to Willa, who was played by Shelley Winters, who thinks that she's marrying this amazing, upstanding man who is going to love her and be amazing. And then as soon as they get married on the honeymoon, he is automatically being abusive to her. He's just talking down to her. And she doesn't really have the willpower to fight him. She's manipulated by him, and she just sort of turns into almost the zombie doing whatever it is that he says to do until she ultimately meets her demise. So you see, like I said, you see the charming side of him as well as the evil side. He's a sociopath. He's a serial killer. He fits into that. And it's amazing this movie made in 1955 could check so many boxes of what we know a serial killer to be at this point. I think the next performance I really loved was Billy Chapin as the young boy John. Not an amazing child actor, but I think he does a great job as far as being the hero of this story. As I mentioned, this is a child's fairy tale, nightmare fairy tale, and he is the hero in this story. And he is really quick to identify the big bad wolf as soon as he shows up. He cuts right through Harry Powell's bullshit. He knows why he's there. He knows he wants the money, and he's trying to protect his little sister. Tries to protect his mom as best he can, but that's a little outside of what he can do at such a young age. I think he's probably 10 or 11 in the movie, and his sister is probably 5 or 6, I would say, at the most. So he's doing the best he can. He does take charge when he has to. As I mentioned, they take that boat down the river, and he kind of guides his sister along, and they find food and find places to sleep, but they're always being tracked. They're always being tracked by Harry Powell. In fact, there's a great moment where Billy's in this farm, and he sees him in the middle of the night. He sees the shadow of Harry Powell in the background, and he says to himself, does he ever sleep? So yeah, that's kind of how Robert Mitchum plays him. He's almost like the Terminator or like a shark, he's just going after his prey. But anyway, Billy is the opposite side of this story. He is the innocent, the good, as it were. He is the one that has his moral center, and he sticks with it all the way through, really until the end. And then he sort of starts to break down as a child would. He has a really lovely moment. It's tender, it's short, where he sort of lets his guard down with Miss Cooper, and he just touches her hand a little bit. And it's kind of just his way of letting that guard down from what he's had to do for most of this movie. And then, again, not to spoil things, but there's sort of a scene that is replayed again towards the end of the movie, And there you really see John just kind of break down and just have all these psychological issues from what's going on in this movie. But eventually you get a nice bit at the end where he's kind of on this path of hope and recovery, and it shows how resilient this child is and these kids are. So I really liked his performance. And then Lillian Gish, as I mentioned, it was cool to see her just knowing in film history how what a big star she was in silent films. And as I mentioned, I didn't know she was in this movie. I saw her name in the credits, and I was like, "Oh my god, Lillian Gish!" And there she was, and she does a great job. She is the foil to Harry Powell. Again, she's much like John. She sees right through his shit, and she's not afraid of him. She's not going to back down. She is a strong, independent woman living in this house by herself with these orphans that she has taken in, and they all have their jobs to do, and they're very regimented, and she provides that to John and Pearl, who really didn't have that with their mother, at least as what we saw in this movie. Because at the beginning, like I said, their dad gets taken away. Their mom ends up with this horrible reverend or preacher, whatever you want to call him. So they've kind of had to deal with it themselves. Now they finally found this motherly figure, this family figure in Miss Cooper with Lillian Gish. And she plays it so great. She can be strong. She can be tough. She has some great one-liners. She does have that shotgun. She's not backing down from Harry Powell in the least bit. But she also, again, she's very maternal. She cleans them up. She, gives them love, buys them some great Christmas presents towards the end of the movie. So she gives them what they need as children, that structure, that reliability, that family life that they didn't have and haven't had throughout this whole movie. And it was great to see such a classic film star in this role. And like I said, she plays this strong, independent woman. And believe it or not, kids, they had those in movies before 2016. I mean, this was in 1955, and she's out there handling her own business and really battling with the evil villain of this movie. But those are the three main cast members that kind of stood out to me. Moving into the next positive, yeah, that is just the direction, the look of the film, which you will hear the most about if you ever hear any kind of interviews about this film or other, reviews or whatnot. I was shocked when I found out that this was Charles Laughton's first and only movie, because the movie didn't do very well. I think it bombed commercially and the critics didn't like it. So he kind of never directed again. He died shortly after this movie at any rate. But yeah, this movie is amazing to look at. I know it has been labeled film noir. For me personally, I would say maybe not in a full-on relationship with film noir, but definitely holding its hand, because there are some amazing uses of shadows and lighting throughout this film, especially with Harry Powell. He wears like this black suit and this big black hat, and he's very recognizable in shadows, and when he's off in the distance where he's riding on that horse and you just see him moving along, and it's just creepy as hell, and he kind of moves in the shadows and half in them and half out of them as he's chasing the kids through like this basement and stuff. Also, I really like this switch that they do with it, where when he finally shows up at Miss Cooper's house and he's stalking them, he's outside in the light and Miss Cooper is in the shadows. And it's really just a neat way to flip things around. There are other cool scenes that just stand out with the way the lighting is. The moment where Willa meets her demise at the hands of Harry is in this bedroom, and just the way the shadows make this room look, it's almost gothic in some regards. So again, I think flirting with film noir, or maybe dancing around with it, it really adds a lot to this movie, especially when you combine it to the sets, which to me was really fascinating as I was watching this movie, because there are stuff outside where the kids are playing, or they have like this picnic scene at one point, and it's shot like a regular movie. But then there are other moments in this film where it's on a set, and it's clearly on a set. It's not trying to pretend like this is real life. That sort of adds to this fairy tale or dark fairy tale world that they're in here. And again, you're getting this from a child's perspective, so this is kind of how they would see things. But you have buildings that don't look quite right, or just too close to each other, or there's like a picket fence that is just a partial picket fence, and the way things move around and are lit with neon in some of the cities, it's just a really cool contrast to the real world looking parts of the film. And it, like I said, it heightens the fear or the uneasiness in this film the dreamlike quality, as it were, that lends itself to that scary bedtime story, that this really is what this movie is, this moral play that we're watching on film. Just the way Charles Lawton moves the camera around in these scenes, or else he just locks things down and everything is so precise the way it is framed. I just dig all of that stuff in movies, so I'm not gonna lie. I was eating that up every time it was on the set, and just the way the angles were. I was like, man, this is really cool. Again, when I saw that this was his first movie, I was like, Jesus Christ, how do you come out of the gate swinging like this? It was amazing. So, yeah, I've got to tip my hat to Charles Lawton. God rest your soul. You did a great job in filming this movie. I did mention it's really dreamlike, which adds to the eeriness or the creepiness of the movie. And there's a scene that I guess I have to mention where we find out what has happened to Willa. And she is basically in this car underwater in this river. And the way it's shot is just so amazing. It's eerie and creepy and beautiful all at once. And again, as much as I say Robert Mitchum is worth watching the movie for, I would say that scene stands out as probably a highlight for me. That or the one where they're in the bedroom, I think that was an amazing shot. But yeah, when she's under there in the water and you see what has happened to her, it's both heartbreaking and you're also just enthralled by the beauty of the shot. So again, I mean, I can't praise Charles Lawton enough with his direction in this film. That's pretty much why you'll hear nothing but praise from several famous. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned, but Guillermo del Toro is a big fan of the movie. William Friedkin, Spike Lee was a big fan of the movie. So yeah, this movie has stood the test of time. It's become a classic, even though it wasn't. It's a shame that Charles Lawton didn't live long enough to see it become the revered film that it is today. The other positive of the movie, and I have to say this every time, but this movie is an hour and a half long. It does move at a breakneck pace, and it's a very linear story, even though I kind of, in my plot synopsis, had to kind of speed through a couple of things, but it does tell the story point A to point B. It doesn't really deviate too much, which we'll get to in some of the negatives of the movie, but you pretty much stay on point with Harry Powell looking for the money and John trying to protect his sister and get away from him. And again, as I say it every time, modern Hollywood, these classic films can do that in an hour and a half. So why do I have to sit in a movie theater for 2.5 hours watching your schlock? So let's go ahead and move into the bad or the negative of the film. And as much as I do enjoy an hour and a half movie, and this is going to be a contradiction and you all are going to call me out for that, but allow me to revel in my hypocrisy. I kind of wish this movie was a little bit longer. I did mention it moves at a breakneck pace. It just seems like you're meeting Harry Powell. Next thing you know, he's learning about the money and away we go. But at that pace, you do sacrifice some things. I don't want to say I want to learn more about Harry Powell. I think I know just enough that I need to know about him. And I think that's the best way you can have a villain in this type of movie. It's borderline a horror movie villain. I like just enough information that he scares me, but I don't want to know sort of the background. Let me create that. So I'm going to give the movie credit for that. But the other side characters, I wish we'd have learned a little more about. Willa, played by Shelley Winters. I keep wanting to say Shelley Long. I'm such a child of the 80s. At any rate, I was a little disappointed with her character. I know Shelley Winters is a great actress, and I was really expecting some fireworks between her and Robert Mitchum and, this amazing performance, which fortunately I got from Lillian Gish. But here, I don't really get enough from her to really feel for her character. I know it sounds weird, but it's like you're introduced to her after her husband Ben is put to death at the jail. He's hanged for his crimes. Well, she's a widow, and then there's these god-awful people in town. I'm going to get to Icy Spoon and her husband Walt. Icy Spoon is just, oh, you got to marry somebody. You can't be a widow. So she goes along with them just to marry Harry Powell. And then she goes along with Harry Powell. She has no spine, no backbone. I get that they can't delve too deeply into an abusive relationship because, as I mentioned, this is 1955. So we're a little behind in the times, as it were, back then. You can't have a movie like you would have today. Today, you would see more of her life. But I did need a little more out of her character, just something to make me understand, because she goes from, I don't want to say a weak character, because you understand, at least from a very superficial point of view, that she's in this time where women are supposed to get married and all that stuff. But she's kind of normal, and then as soon as Harry kind of turns on her, she's instantly like a different character. She's just following him around. She's a zombie in parts of the movie where she just walks around with this weird smile and she's hardly blinking. And even when she meets her demise, it's a really weird, creepy scene because she's just not even fazed by it, which, I get from the standpoint of that's where her character is at that point, that she's almost welcoming what's going to happen to her. But at the same time, I just really wish there would have been more of her, maybe either that, or if the movie's not very good at explaining how much time has passed through things. Maybe if there'd have been a line like, Ben's been dead for a year and a half or something, something to let me know that she's sort of moved past the grieving. I don't know. I just wish there was more to that character. And conversely, I wish there was less of Icy Spoon and her husband, Walt. I should say the actor's name. Let's see. Icy was played by Evelyn Varden, and her husband, Walt, is played by Don Bedeau. I think that's how you say his last name. At any rate, they were annoying as hell to me. They're there for some comic relief. Icy Spoon is just this overbearing witch, basically. She just doesn't take no for an answer. She's the sort of person that just would come over to your house and just sort of invade your space and help themselves to your food, or, walk into places in your house where you're like, hey, wait a minute, you should ask before you go in there. Like walking into your bedroom. That's always something you don't want someone just to walk in your house and do that. At any rate, she's very domineering, even to her husband, Walt, and that's where some of the quote-unquote laughs come from. That part just didn't work for me. I kind of get what they were going for, but I didn't enjoy their characters, and every time they were on the screen, I just got under my skin, and I was like, Jesus Christ, let's just move on from these two. Another character I think gets let down is Uncle Bertie, played by James Gleason. I thought he was going to play more of a part in the movie. I kind of thought he was going to fight for the kids, but he's a really old man and maybe Harry would kill him or something like that. Instead, it just turns out he's a drunk and he doesn't really offer any help or guidance or anything. So another character I felt like, okay, that's kind of wasted right there. I wish they'd have done more with him. And I hate to say this, I really do, but the little girl, Sally Jane Bruce, that plays Pearl, I understand, again, she was probably, gosh, she looked like she was maybe 4, 5, or 6, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. And I can forgive her performance at that age. That was no big deal, but I just did not like her character. There were points of the movie where I was just thinking, Johnny, you should just toss her over the boat. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but she kind of gets annoying, and her character is kind of weird because she's like, she loves Harry Powell, who's her new daddy. But then when he tries to kill her, she's like, oh, I hate him. But then she sees him go, oh, I love him. It's really weird. There's another character who was living with Miss Cooper, one of the other orphans or whatever. Ruby, I think that was her name. She's kind of this little, I guess, town slut, maybe? I don't know. All the boys are always, every time she's coming into town, like she sneaks away and says she's going to sewing classes on Thursday night. Instead, she's going in there to be with the boys. So my impression is that she's a little slut. This movie is dripping with sexuality, as it were. Everything kind of falls back into line with that. It was just a weird character because she's the one that kind of inadvertently lets Harry know that the kids are living with Miss Cooper. But and it's another character I wish maybe we had spent a little more time with, so I understood her better, because the way she acts around here, I mean, she first meets him and she's instantly in love with him. He's not like the others. He's a great man and all that stuff. So that was another character where I was like, I really wish I'd had more to go with here. So really, I think that's where the film sort of let me down, was with the side characters. I think the main characters that I talked about, they really carry the movie for me. Unfortunately, they are forefront through most of the movie, but those side characters, I just think they needed a little more development, maybe a little more time in the movie, so I could have cared about them one way or the other. And my final, I don't want to put this in a name. I know, Frank, if you're listening, and I know you are, you're going to be pissed at me when I say this. But for some of you out there, yes, this movie was made in 1955. It is a black and white film. It is of its time, although, as I mentioned, Miss Cooper is a strong, independent female character that I think most women would root for. But at any rate, it is of its time. So some of that will come through in some of the performances. There are some over the top moments here and there. There's some other stuff that just kind of struck me as weird for the time. I don't know. I have one thing I was going to ask about. Somebody could help me out. Maybe Frank, you could help me out. Anybody, just let me know. There's a moment where Ben is in the prison cell with Harry and they're talking. And for some reason, Ben pulls one of his socks out of his shoe, wads it up into a ball, and sticks it into his mouth and goes to sleep. And I don't know. Maybe I was taking that in a weird way, but I thought that meant he was basically going to let Harry do what he needed to do. He was just going to bite on his sock. But I had no idea. It was such a weird thing. So I don't know if that was something of the period that meant something, but I don't know. It was really weird. But at any rate, this movie is from 1955. So if you're one of those people who can't watch something like this, you're not going to enjoy it. It's a shame if you tune it out for that, but I'm going to put it in the negative just to warn you of that. I think you should watch it. We'll get to that momentarily because of what it is visually. I think it's worth watching for that. At any rate, we'll get to that momentarily, but I will warn everybody, yes, this is from 1955. So all of you young people will be like, oh my god, it's black and white. Why do they talk funny? Me. Oh, you fuckers. You know what? There were movies before 2000, and a lot of them were better than the shit that you watch now. I'd rather watch this movie 100 times than this damn movie I gotta watch this weekend with Captain America and Red Hulk or whatever. Oh, good lord. Anyway, I'm getting angry. I'm getting bitter. I'm a bitter old man yelling at clouds. Speaking of yelling at clouds, let's go ahead and move into the nitpicky. And again, these are things that are neither good nor bad, just silly things I pick up in these movies. The first one, I mentioned Uncle Bertie. This is sort of a character, a male role model at the beginning of the movie for John, who goes over. He's got this little shack on the river that he fishes from and stuff like that. But when John shows up the first time he walks in and Uncle Bertie, he's like, hey, you want some coffee? And he pours him a mug of black coffee. I'm like, this kid is 8 years old and you're giving him straight black coffee. Oh my dear God. This kid is more badass than I am. Plus, he's going to be hopped up on caffeine. He'll be bouncing all over the place. He'll be swimming up and down that river before too long. But I just laughed. That is definitely something from a different time in this world. Here, John, it made you some black coffee. Drink it like a man. You're 8 years old now. It's time to put away childish things and be a man. Here's a couple of cigarettes while you're at it. My next nitpick. This is probably why Miss Cooper is a strong, independent woman, especially if you put her in this time and place. She goes into town selling eggs from her chickens. And I was like, damn, that lady would be making a killing right now. There's at one point where she drops like 3 or 4 of them and my heart broke. I was like, no, that's like $40 worth of eggs you just lost, Miss Cooper. But it's just funny nowadays to look at something like that where she's carrying in, I think there's like 5 of them. They got 5 baskets full of eggs. And you're like, oh my God, that would pay my rent for the next month. And my last nitpick for this film is that as Harry is driving along at the beginning of the movie, having his conversation with God, I couldn't help but think, if only he had a radio in his car, maybe this would have averted his path of murder and destruction across America. You know, maybe if he got to ride in his car and listen to an Elvis Presley song at the time, or I don't know, who else was out? Sha-na-na? I don't know. That's really old stuff. Frank Sinatra, if he was listening to some Frank Sinatra, he wouldn't have time to be talking to God about who he should murder next, and he would be a happier person for it. So let's all thank whoever created the car radio for sparing so many lives over the years. So overall, my final verdict for The Night of the Hunter. While, yes, I did mention this is very much a product of its time, I think it was an enjoyable watch. I think Robert Mitchum is well worth watching to see him as this diabolical villain, this nasty big bad wolf in this dark fairy tale of a movie. Again, John, that little boy, he's no snitch. I ain't saying nothing. Wasn't that a Simpson character? Wasn't there one where they had one of the mobsters had one where I ain't saying nothing. At any rate. He was pretty much a badass. Lillian Gish as Miss Cooper, she was a badass. It was a fun movie to watch. Again, I tell you, it's 90 minutes, straight line. You don't have to deviate too much. And aside from those performances, again, I just cannot heap enough praise on the visuals in this film and the weird look of it and how it makes the movie creepier or more unsettling, more dreamlike in places, more beautiful, even though you shouldn't be admiring the beauty of a shot because of what's morbid inside of the shot. But yeah, I think all of that works really well. I think it's an important movie. I know I joke about, being an old movie and you kids not watch it, but you should watch stuff like this so you can understand how we got to where we are today and why someone can look at a movie and be like, oh, that's awful, because you can see in this older movie the craftsmanship and the love and everything that's put on the screen. So yeah, I mean, it was on Tubi, which if you don't have Tubi, you should get it. It's free. I love Tubi. They got a bajillion offerings, a lot of good movies, a lot of good older movies. You do have to put up with commercials, but it's free, so whatever. Anyway, it was on Tubi. I think it's on YouTube as well, so definitely check out The Night of the Hunter and let me know what you think. If you believe it is the classic that it has become or if it's some silly movie from 1955. Speaking of silly movies, join me on my next episode when I will be reviewing Captain America: Brave New World. I get to follow a classic movie with an MCU movie. Oh, be still my beating heart. So definitely come back and check that out. If you're still listening, then I must have done something right. And again, if you could please follow the show, give me a rating, a review, share the show with your friends and family on social media. I would appreciate all the help I could get. Also, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to my show. I tell everyone I know I've got the smartest and sexiest audience in all the podcast universe, and you never fail to live up to those high standards. And as you are traveling around on this blue and green ball bouncing through the cosmos, avoiding preachers in black suits singing weird hymns in your front yard, I need you to do one thing for me. Go out there and do that voodoo that you do so well. Punch it.